Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, episode 29 of the Rugby League Coach podcast. We're back, and as we've just discussed off air, this will be probably the final little podcast from this trio for the year, and then we'll pick back up early in the new year. First, I'll introduce you again to my co-host, my little pommy mate over there, Lee Addison. Lee, we're going to have a bit of a break after this one, mate.
Yeah, why not? Why not? I mean, it's not hard work. All we do is talk to each other. And we're pretty ad-lib about it. But yeah, I just think, mate, I've got, personally, for Rugby League Coach, I've got enough content we can put out for people, and it just means that, you know, we can all spend time with our friends and families a little bit, rather than, I know you've had to duck off now from fatherly duties, for example, just to record this. So, you know, it's not a stress for us, and we love doing it, don't we, TB? But a couple of weeks off, I'm sure everyone understands, and I'm sure it'll be good for all of us. So,
and if you are craving some Rugby League Coach in those 2 weeks, you can find plenty of Lee's page. If you've seen all Lee's posts, if you've heard all his podcasts, and you're up to date, well, check yourself into rehab and wait for 2 weeks. All right, it's only 14 days. Okay, we're going to be all good. Introducing again as well, my pommy mate, Mr. James Varley. Surrounded by poms, I am these days, Varley, aren't I?
Well, you are, Taylor, aren't you? Yeah, it's taken an interesting turn with this.
It has. It has, but you've become a very staple part of this podcast, James, and I'm very happy to see you each week. It's become a lot of fun, and we'll start off this podcast, if this is going to be the last one, saying, fellas, Merry Christmas, have a good holidays.
Hey, I have got a Christmas hat that I pull out occasionally, right? But the funniest thing is, I just bought it in IGA one day, didn't try it on. It literally goes nowhere near fitting on my head. So, like a wizard or something. So, yeah.
I don't have anything to put on, I'm afraid. I don't have a Christmas hat, so I'm going to have to stay back.
Oh, mate, you don't put anything on that head, Val. You don't want any of your last hairs left to rub off.
No, exactly. I shave it off out of choice now. Yeah, it's just... we're doing it again, really, but yeah, very true, very true.
All right, well, as the people know that have been watching this podcast for the last couple of weeks, we've been discussing several positions on the football field. We've been discussing props. It was prop idol we started off with. We went to back hookers, then back rowers. We've worked our way down to the base of the scrum. We're now talking about locks. Lee, James, just as Lee did last week, I'm going to start off with a curveball.
I told you he would.
I wanted to mix it up a little bit. I know Lee did NRL teams, Super League teams last week. This time for locks, I'm going to go through the years of the Dally M, and I'm going to see if you guys can pick who won Dally M lock of the year that year. What do you mean, oh no? What's oh no mean? The most dominant lock of that year. There's not too many, because I'll give you a hint. Some blokes have won doubles. Now, if you're anything as smart as Lee, James, you'll be Googling right now, because I can see him typing in right there. I can see you straight away. Well, lads, if anything, this will serve as a trip down memory lane, and it will be a little bit of an educational trip down memory lane for myself, because most of these I actually never saw play, being such a young, strapping lad myself. So we'll start off with the birth of the Dally M's in 1980.
Some fella called Jim Leise.
Jim Lee. I'm going to say Leise. Any idea who Jim Leise was? Did you watch Jim Leise play, Varley?
I didn't. No, I didn't. I was only in primary school myself at that time, just starting school. So no, I didn't see him at all. I can think of one from the early 80s who I will then, but
I reckon you'll get him, because he won Dally M lock of the year from 1982 to 1986 in the famous Parramatta colours.
Ray Price.
Ray Price. Yeah, of course.
That's amazing that he's done that so many years.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that he's 5 years in a row he's won that award, which is sensational to think someone can hold such a record. I think it is the record. As I looked further down the list, another person that I know we have mentioned this person in a couple of podcasts ago. 1987, 1988, Wayne Pearce, lock of the year.
Mate, don't get me wrong, I don't think he changed the way the game was played from a skill perspective, but from a fitness and a preparation and an engine perspective. he was a beast. He was a machine. And he, again, I keep going back to this team whenever we're talking about these players. Keep mentioning that invincible side of 1982, the Kangaroo side. Wayne Pearce was the lock. So, he was the embodiment of that change, really. And what's amazing is he won the Dally M Lock of the Year, 87 and 88. So the year he was the Kangaroos lock, he wasn't even the best lock in the country, according to this award system. So, he's had a great career, did Junior Pearce.
We're going to move on now because between Wayne Pearce and Ray Price, they've basically covered all of the 80s, which is just sensational to think of how good they must have been.
We didn't mention Steve Rogers, 81.
Oh, we didn't. Sorry, you're right. Steve Rogers, 1981. For the Sharks, wasn't Steve Rogers? 81? Steve Rogers?
I think
Sharks?
it was,
yeah. Bradley Clyde, 89 and 90.
It's funny, Brad Clyde came up a bit last week too, and again, one of the things I've been saying on socials is that people have gone, "Oh, he's the best second rower," but I've always thought of him as a lock, or he's the best lock, or and I thought of him as a second row. So, but Bradley Clyde was, I'd say, a step above Wayne Pearce in terms of skill level and some of the things he brought to the game, some of the nuances and the idiosyncrasies. But Wayne Pearce was the epitome of the fitness-based lock forward.
And that's really shone through to today, hasn't it? The fitness-based lock. It's very prevalent. Some of the best locks of our game, Victor Radley, Cameron Murray, are just known for how fit they are in and around those positions. Next, of course, this bloke we've spoken about a couple of times, Lee, not necessarily on our positional-based rugby league coach podcast, but on our topical base throughout the year, Des Hasler. 1991.
For him to win Lock of the Year that year, despite essentially being a half or a hooker, is a really good achievement from Desmond Tutu. So, good old Des.
Yeah, I didn't actually realise he played lock. Des Hasler, but he was just a halfback. So I
didn't either.
Oh,
Des also was a fitness freak. So they'd stop at service stations apparently, and he'd just go and do push-ups in the gardens of the service stations while everyone else was going getting milkshakes or whatever. So, there's another lock around that time though that in England would be called a loose forward, and we can't go past this. To me, the best loose forward lock to ever play the game, Ellery Hanley. And I know I'm biased because I'm British, but it's not like I often talk about British players in the same breath, or I don't talk about the Super League in the same breath as the NRL. But to me, Ellery Hanley was somebody who could play in any era, and not only at lock, he could probably be one of the best props, one of the best hookers, one of the best halves, one of the best centres, one of the best wings, one of the best fullbacks. He was such an athlete. He could either run over you, run past you, step past you, palm you, pass the ball to somebody in a better position to get past you. He could even run 45-degree angles and to get past you. And so well respected over here in Australia as well, mate. Like as a Balmain player, and then I think he played West Magpies as well. So, in terms of West Tigers, that merger, he's covered both of them. So he's a legend at both those clubs too. Do you remember him, TB, in any way, shape, or form?
No, I don't. I was about to move on to that and say that I actually have no memory of Ellery Hanley playing. Is that the early 90s, are you saying?
Late 80s, early 90s. Do yourself a favour and YouTube search him. Like, honestly, mate, he's... I think he would get in any NRL team now. Even with his fitness level then, Because it was a different game then. But
very different game.
But yeah, he was a freak. He was a freak.
So Ellery Hanley obviously getting an honourable mention for his work in the late 80s, early 90s. We then move on to an era, a 5-year era, where we have Ian Russell 92, Jim Dimmick 93, Fittler 94, and then Jim Dimmick going back-to-back 95, 96. What a dominant era from Jim Dimmick.
I don't remember Ian Russell at all.
I don't.
I'm going to click on his name.
Already have. He's from Mittagong.
Just saw that. He played in England somewhere.
He did, Sheffield Eagles.
Right.
So he played Dalian Lock of the Year in 92, where he played for the Steelers. So then went to
He's
the
had
Cowboys.
quite an extensive career in England too.
He has.
When did he play over here? Because it's a name I don't really remember.
He played in 90 and 91 for Sheffield.
Right.
Super League in 96 for Paris Saint-Germain.
All right.
And then Oldham in 97.
Don't remember him at all. Sorry, Ian.
Sorry there, pal.
Mittagong's near Bowral, isn't it?
Yeah, home of the Mittagong Lions, the mighty Mittagong Lions.
I was wondering where those Lions were from.
Oh, actually, I don't think they're the Mittagong Lions, actually, now I think of it.
Aren't they?
That's another. No, I'm thinking of the Gerringong Lions.
Oh.
Sorry, Mittagong's. It's going to kill me. I'm going to have to look it up now.
Yeah.
But yeah, then we move on. Tarira Nikau in 98, Jason Smith 99, and then
you're missing
Jason
them all out
Croker.
here. Whoa.
What do you mean I'm missing them all? Then I'm doing a 2 or 3
Freddie
block.
Fittler,
I know.
94. You missed it out.
He mentioned him earlier.
I did mention Fittler.
Brush over it. Brad Fittler, one of the best players to ever play the game.
Mate, we were too consumed by looking up Ian Russell. But yeah, Brad Fittler, lock of the year
And
in 94.
Jim Dimmock, I don't remember him. I remember him being a good player, but I didn't think he had that much of a hold on the position.
Well, 3 years, 93, 95 and 96. Yeah, that's huge. But Brad Fittler obviously getting lock of the year. It's funny, I've always thought of Brad Fittler as a 5'8", almost exclusively as a 5'8".
He'd have been at Penrith then, wouldn't he, 94?
Yes, he would have been at Penrith. But
I was watching some videos last night. Brad Fittler's step was immense, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because I'm contemplating him for his selections, and his step superb.
Yeah, his left foot step. I still remember watching him. I was only a couple of years ago. And I remember when he had that tournament in the nines for the Roosters. It wasn't even that long ago, Lee. You might even remember the exact year. Could have been 2012 or 13 or something. He was almost 40 years old and ended up playing in the nines tournament for the Roosters and took one of his famous intercepts and scored off his left foot as well. It was sensational. But yeah, Brad Fittler, one of the best of. And of course, another notable mention, we've spoken about him a lot this year in terms of coaching in that origin side. And possibly we had a few predictions if he'd pop up somewhere else, but he didn't end up in the end. So Tarira Nikau, Jason Smith and Croker to round off the late 90s into the 2000s.
James will have big memories of Tarira Nikau.
At Castleford, he was superb. Probably the best Castleford team I've seen in the early 90s when they had the triangle Mike Ford, Tony Kent, Tarira Nikau. And these people running off Lee Crook, Graham Stedman at fullback.
So basically, Tarira Nikau basically formed his career in England. I'm sure he started somewhere in Oz and then came to England and then came to the NRL a bit later in his career and was obviously one of the best knocking around because in 98 he won the Lock of the Year. In 99 he won the comp with Melbourne. So it's obviously one of the better ones and definitely one of the best in New Zealand Rugby League history. Definitely.
Yes, definitely.
Lost a leg in a car accident or bike accident, didn't he?
Did he? He did. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he had a spell at Warrington, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He was still very good then too.
When Langer came over and Andrew G in that same team. Yeah.
Back then, Taylor, there used to be an awful lot of Kiwis playing English rugby league.
Is that because they could get them over with the passports because they were New Zealand citizens, not Australian?
I think, yeah, possibly, but also the two comps were played at different times of the year. So whereas the Super League came in and stopped, you had to make a binary choice whether you stay in the NRL or in Super League. Back then, the English game was played in the English winter, so September to May. So you could either lean towards having a full season in England and then a part of your time in the NRL, or the opposite. It wasn't called the NRL then; it was a Winfield Cup. But yeah, you could do that. So, and I just think as well throughout history, the pound has tended to be stronger than the dollar. So if the money was there, then it was good. Because I remember from my time in Super League with Wigan and Salford, there was a lot of quite high-profile Aussies coming over, and you would still say they were not in the prime, but not that far off the prime. Not that far out of the prime kind of thing. So
Yeah, well, I think you're seeing a little bit of that as well these days. I mean, Tom Opacek, who's a relatively young centre, of course, played with the Parramatta Eels this year in that grand final side. He's over there this year. I believe he signed, I think it's to Wakefield. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. But he's coming over at a relatively good time in his career. He's only 28 or 27, really coming into that sort of final, not really final stages, but, this is where he's going to be playing his best football.
What does tend to happen now, I mean, I don't think the lure, I can never say the word, the lure, L-U-R-E, of the pound and versus the dollar is as good right now. I'm not sure. But what a lot of Super League teams do is they might offer a player like that 3 or 4 years, whereas an NRL club might offer him 1 or 2. So
long-term security. Right, so we mentioned Tawira Nicow, then Jason Smith and Jason Croker as well.
Jason's did well, yeah.
Yeah, the Jasons did well. Daniel Wagon for Parramatta. He was a quality player, Daniel Wagon. Yeah, he's one that...
Jason Smith was a great lock.
He was.
And he was a hard-working... I don't remember a great amount of him moving the ball around, but more locking the scrum, being the glue that holds the pack together, basically.
Well, I think that's sort of... Can I say that's the formula that teams seem to have gone with from that late 90s through to about 2010 as I'm looking at here. There's just a lot of really, really hard-hitting locks that were just the glue to their side, really fit and just went all day. We'll go through some of them now. Steve Menzies was 2002. We've already mentioned Steve Menzies in our second back rowers.
Yeah, I mean, he could use the ball, so...
Yeah, so
again, you've gone from them using somebody who sort of is the glue that holds the pack together to then somebody like Daniel Wagon, who I would put a bit more on the mobile side of the spectrum. I'm pretty sure he played in some other positions as well, Daniel Wagon. Steve Menzies, who is like a back but in a bigger body.
Yes.
And Sean Timmins was also, 2004, Sean Timmins was also a footballer. He wasn't just
Sean Timmins.
He wasn't just a cart horse. Like he was a...
Sean Timmins was a sensational footballer. I'll never forget the left foot drop kick in that 2005 Origin series. I think it would have been 2006. And of course, he was playing for the Dragons, and I grew up watching the Dragons. So
didn't Timmins play some 6?
He played 6 in Origin at Origin level. He was a really quality ball playing lock, Sean Timmins.
And then Ben Kennedy, 2005, 2006. You don't think of him as somebody who moved the ball around a lot, but...
He didn't need to. He went over people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he did, but...
They let him pass the training. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you don't... I always think of somebody like Ben Kennedy, and it's like what happens with Jake Trbojevic now. I feel like Jake Trbojevic passes the ball too much, pre-line, premeditated.
Yes.
If you're defending, you're saying, please, Jake, pass the ball. Please, Jason Tamalolo, pass the ball.
Yes.
Please, Adrian Morley, pass the ball. You don't. Can you imagine Gordon Tallis doing a pre-line pass?
Yeah, no, he'd punch. He'd go back in time and knock himself out.
I know. He'd catch his own pass and then run back, wouldn't he?
Sean Timmins, and then as we mentioned, we start going into this hard hitting toss-style front rower. Ben Kennedy, 05-06. Dallas Johnson in 07, the Queensland great Dallas Johnson, played a lot of football for the Melbourne Storm. And then Alan Tongue, little old Alan Tongue, swapping between hooker and lock.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest Raiders ever, winning the award in 08.
There's an interesting thing there that if you've got a hooker that can switch to lock, you remember Mick Cassidy, don't you, James?
Yes. Yeah. Because couldn't he play back row and prop as well?
He played prop, he played hooker, he played second row, he played loose forward. Like, it's something I actually tell some kids who are aspiring to go far in the game. If you're a lock who's not the biggest, make sure you can pass a football from the floor, because if you can be available in both positions, you can use up you can save an interchange for a team.
Yes,
well, you can, and if you can pass from the floor, it's such a difference. When I was watching that Hookers video with you last week. Brandon Smith wasn't always passing from the floor. That shocked me, actually.
I know, but he's probably morphing into a bit of a running player now, isn't he?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So No, you're right. That those shorter locks that can do both, they've just increased their suitability for any side. And as you said, Lee, if you are one of those shorter style locks that learns how to pass off the ground and sort of increase your skill, you're just screaming at the coach to get picked as well. You're really doing those extra yards. So after Alan Tongue, we go 09 David Stagg, 2010 Luke Lewis, and then 11 and 12 Paul Gallen.
My memories of David Stagg aren't great. Not in the sense that I've got bad memories of him, in the sense that I just can't remember much of him playing. You know, sometimes players just pass you by and you don't really have a big read on them. Well, I do remember Daniel Stagg, but I don't remember loads about his game. So
I think the problem with Stagg was that he had Webke and Seven Receiver as his front rowers. So when you have such quality in the middle, it can be hard to necessarily shine and outshine players of such quality. You know, he was in and outside the Australian front rowers on a weekly basis in that 09 era. So it would be so hard to really prove your worth and all that, or even just be memorable. But obviously an outstanding 2009 season to take up the Dally M. And then Luke Lewis in the lock position in 2010. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's for the Penrith Panthers, isn't it?
Yeah, it was 2010. Yeah. That's when I was at Penrith. I met him.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Again, emblematic of the second row lock interchangeability, but also Luke Lewis started out on the wing, I think, too. So
he did.
Paul Gallen winning it 2011 and 2012, and then again in 2017. So there's another three-peat. I mean, nobody's won it as many times as Ray Price. It might as well be called the Ray Price Award for a few years. But I think that there shows how good a player Paul Gallen was. I mean, I've mentioned his name this week on the socials, and of course there's people who mention the drugs and this, that and the other. Well, there was no proof he ever took any, was there?
I believe there was proof that he did take some peptides, but it was club administered, which is why the Sharks itself got in trouble. Now, I've always had a very tough standing on this when I heard the issues. And I want to be absolutely clear here. This is my recollection of the incident. I haven't done any recent research, but all my memories were, and the questions I was asked and was asking people around the time that this came out was, this could happen to absolutely any NRL player or anyone in a semi-professional setting in any club around the world. The amount of times that I would come in from a training session and there was a bottle with my name on it that had protein in it, that had pre-workout in it, that had something in it that I had to quickly shove in my guts right there and then. The amount of times that happened, I would not be able to sit here and count, from my time.
So you could have taken something without knowing?
Absolutely, I could have taken something without knowing, purely off backing the clubs that I was with. Now, I never in my career got done for steroids or anything like that. I never flagged with ASADA, but I had that trust in that team around me.
It happened to me playing
club.
too. I remember somebody just giving us something before a match.
Yeah, and it's club administered. It's it's paid for from the club, and these things happen. And as much as I don't see that as a dull on Paul Gallen's career, I just don't. I think it would have been an honest mistake. But Paul Gallen, I think, is just, if you're talking about wanting glue to a forward pack, wanting a hard-hitting man that runs the ball and will do their job for 80 minutes, I don't think there's a better lock that ever played than Paul Gallen, in my opinion.
In your lifetime, definitely. I think the thing that makes Gal stand out amongst similar players is that I don't think there's that many who played for 80 minutes like him in the middle of an Origin game.
Yes.
So in that sense, he transcended the role a little bit. I mean, there'll be people screaming at this pod, saying, "Oh, there's been plenty," because pre this list. I mean, Mal Riley would have done a great job, and a few others that we can maybe mention later. But I do think in this modern era, Paul Gallen really does stand out. So in the NRL era, for example, he definitely stands out because the NRL competition was born 25 years ago.
Yes.
So the 1998 was the first year. And I guess I think he, just looking along this list now, he and Jason Tamalolo were the two that have won it 3 times.
Yes.
You wouldn't be surprised if Yeo wins it a third time. But ultimately, that suggests to me straight away that both Paul Gallen and Jason Tamalolo, have been the two best locks of the last 20 years, kind of thing. So,
yeah, I agree. I think they have been the best lock of the last 20 years. But as we move further and further down this list, Lee, you do start to see a little bit of a shift. We'll keep going for now, though. Corey Parker, Sam Burgess, and then a double by Tamalolo. Corey Parker.
The thing that jumps out to me as well is that Paul Gallen won it in 2012, and then it was Corey Parker, Burgess, Tamalolo. And for Paul Gallen to come back and win it again,
yes,
when in theory he's been knocked off his perch, is testament to him too. But then Jason Tamalolo won it again, so that's probably when he decided to take up boxing. But
there is a large gap in between, and I know you said theoretically he was knocked off his perch. That may be what the history books say, that he was pushed off his perch. But all of us who were watching at that time, watching that whole era, Paul didn't necessarily have any bad years.
No, he might have been injured for periods too. And the other thing is that the Sharks probably weren't performing that well some of that time as well. So that is indicative too. I mean, I bet if you look through a lot of these teams, a lot of these players, their teams did well that year too. So that is really important when it comes to these individual accolades.
Corey Parker. Didn't he had a long career and then went into the lock towards the back end of his career. Was a great footballer. Really good footballer.
Strikes me as a footballing lock.
Yes.
Looks the same age now as he did when he played.
Yeah.
he always looked old.
Oh, Corey Clooney Parker.
Yeah. But yeah, real good footballer. Good football brain too. You've listened to him commentate, you know he's got a football brain. So yeah.
Sam Burgess, speaking of football brains, now pushed into the coaching realm side of rugby league. And he's doing some good work. Of course, he famously was coaching the Axemen, Oran Park Axemen, this year in 2022, and I believe has now taken up a role with the South Sydney Rabbitohs as part of their coaching staff, Lee.
Yeah, I would imagine Sam would be one of those people that was a good leader when he played. So that leadership will be good if he's on the coaching staff. Sometimes people are just good to be around the place. And I would imagine Sam fits that. I don't know about his coaching ability. I don't know about his football brain in that sense. But I just know you'd rather have your Sam Burgess on your team and with you than not with you. And I think he's always come across as an affable chap. So, and he's the kind of bloke that if he tells you to do something, you know he's done it before several times. So,
yes. But
I do think of him as a prop. I really do. Yeah. He was a bit more of a back rower in England when he was younger, but ultimately I think he's a prop. He's that classic example of a hit-up man.
Yeah, I think the way you say, when you're referring to him being around the club and just adding that sort of leadership, it reminds me very much of, and you will remember this vividly, Lee, actually you might have been at the club at the time. I remember reading this in a newspaper and thinking, what is going on, until I read it properly. When Ben Kennedy signed for Manly for $1. They had to give him a certain amount of money because legally with insurances and stuff, he had to be a paid athlete. But he was already, I think he was owning a fruit shop. He was running a fruit shop.
That's right.
And Manly desperately wanted him around the place to help with the culture, just to train with the boys and be around. Yeah. And they signed him for $1. I actually think it was a multi-year deal. It could have been 50 cents a year or something.
Probably still on contract now.
Probably still on contract, yeah. No reason why he can't sign a 20-year deal for $1 a pop.
Yeah.
But yeah, and actually the way they played on the football field, both of them they led from the front, courageous, real sort of captain's knocks, both of those players. Then we move into the Tomalolo and Gallen period. Tomalolo 15, Tomalolo 16, Gallen 17, and Tomalolo again in 2018. So this is sort of the rounding off of that really argy-bargy period, because as we look further down the list now in the pointy end, 2019 Cameron Murray, and then 2020 and 2021, Isaiah Yeo. We've now sort of moved. It's almost like you see throughout the list of this Dally M year by year, you ebb and flow through the real power players and then the sort of smaller, nippier players that have really good hands acting as that second 5'8".
And don't forget as well, we've also got the 6 again rule now to contend with. And I'm pretty convinced that came in 2020.
Just went after COVID, didn't it? Really seems to be after the pandemic.
Yeah, Cameron Murray is suffering a little bit from Zayo being on the scene and being a Premiership winner, because I think Cameron Murray is really good. Cameron Murray reminds me of Brad Clyde.
Yes.
He also reminds me a little bit. Do you remember Mike Forshaw, James?
I do. Yeah.
Quite small.
Yeah.
For somebody in the park, but had football, could do things both sides of the body, tackle with both shoulders.
Great work, right?
I mean, ultimately, I think Cameron Murray has won Australia the World Cup because he scored that try in the semi-final.
Yeah.
That was the difference.
Yes.
And it was his football brain when he saw Brandon Smith on his haunches that made him override whatever was going on and just run in that direction and score what seemed to be the easiest try under the posts. But ultimately that won the game. And because even though Australia won the final, they won it by 20 points. New Zealand held them to a 2-point victory. Yeah, so I think that was the key try. And if that try hadn't have happened, New Zealand would have been in the World Cup final. Because Australia didn't score a try in that half apart from that.
Yeah, I'm massive on Cameron Murray. I love the way he plays football. And you're right in saying that he is a footballer. And one thing that strikes me about Cameron Murray, and I'm going to give myself away early, Cameron Murray is my lock for the team that we are picking.
Okay.
I've had him picked for a while. And the reason why I'm picking Cameron Murray, not only team dynamics with the forward pack I've chosen, all those sorts of things. I don't think I need the extra 5'8" and Yo. If I'm going to have Smith and a few of the others, I'll pick at 5'8" and half later on. Cameron Murray is one of the only lock forwards that I've seen in the modern game, especially, that has probably 10 out of 10 support play. Every time someone makes a break through the middle, if it's not him, he's there. He's pushing up in support. And in some ways, his speed off the mark, he can act as if he's another fullback.
That's what Ellery Hanley was like.
Yeah.
The difference is Ellery Hanley was heavier.
Right.
So if you put Ellery at prop, he would do a fantastic job.
Yes.
I don't know if you put Cam Murray at prop for that long in a game. You wouldn't start him at prop. You know, like it.
You'd have your mate Junior Barlow starting at prop, and then you'd bring Cameron Murray in.
But you took the words out of my mouth, Lee, really, with Ellery, because even his last year at Leeds, when he was in his mid-30s, he got about, however old he was, he got about 30-odd tries for him.
Yeah. Ellery used to stand offside. Taylor.
Yeah.
Definitely Google him and have a look, mate. It's well worth it. Especially when you put it in that context of 80s and 90s.
Yes.
So he finished in the early years of Super League, basically. And, mate, there's some tries he scored. He was 5 meters, 6 meters in front to play the ball.
Didn't he still have a spell in Australia after he retired over here? After he coached Great Britain?
I think he played for West Magpies then. I think
he did. I think he did as well.
Yeah.
I think he finished over there.
Because West Magpies then were perennial wooden spooners, so if they needed anything. He was their Ben Kennedy. And, But yeah, mate, honestly, there was sometimes he seemed maybe fives stretching it, but because it was one referee and the one referee would be looking at the ruck. So he was smart enough to sneak out of the ref's eye line and pop up in places.
But as you say, smart, very, very smart player.
So how much of these ebbs and flows that we're seeing, Leah, do you think they're indicative of the times and the periods of football we were watching? Or do you think that was just that lock, that style that fit with that team? For example, Paul Gallen at Cronulla, when they had people like Wade Graham and that in the forward rotation that did have really good hands, they didn't necessarily need a ball playing lock. So Paul really fit their team and their mold of leadership.
Well, I remember specifically 1999 was a year of unlimited interchange. And Jason Smith, who won the award that year, would be somebody who would excel under that because he was quite a heavy body with a huge engine on him. And what you got each week was virtually the same. His 7 out of 10 game and his worst game was 7 out of 10.
Yes.
His best game was 10 out of 10. And what you found, I think, with unlimited interchange, particularly in England, was that you didn't need to have that much football in you. And you could literally just keep rolling on, keep rolling on, keep rolling on, keep rolling on, keep rolling on. And if you blasted the other team off the park, it worked. So that would lend itself to putting a bit more into your lock, I think, having a bit of vision. But I don't think it's necessarily a position that has evolved. I think it's a position where a lot of coaches, I just decide that they've got a set thing in mind and they're going to do that, so they're going to have it as a third prop. But also, there's other coaches who just use it as the glue. So, for example, I'll give you an example. If you've got an Ellery Hanley or a Braithen Astor or a Kevin Sinfield in England, or I'm just looking at this list now, maybe Cameron Murray, maybe Alan Tong, maybe Sean Timmins, that lock can decide themselves whether their team needs another hit up or needs some ball movement. And they can fill in accordingly. So I played a bit of lock as a kid, and I tended to just go with the sense of what we needed as a team. Not that I was a fantastic mover of the football, but I would hang a bit wider if I thought that was if there wasn't as much grunt work required. Whereas if the grunt work was required, I'd get a bit closer to the ruck. That was sort of like my game sense at loose forward, if you like. Yeah. So if you've got that in your lock position, that can be another element to your game. I think now with somebody like Isaiah or Cameron Murray, a lot of them, and Jake Trebojevic. Interesting, Jake Trebojevic had never won Lock of the Year, by the way.
No.
A lot of them get used to be almost like a third half as well at times. But to me, they do a lot of it pre-line, which probably a bit too much, really. Because like I say, you would never tell. You never want Jason. As a defender, you want Jason Tamalolo to pass the ball, don't you?
Yes.
I'll pick one out from way back in England, Lee. Do you remember David Heron, who went at Leeds and Bradford? Do you remember him?
Who?
You were a bit more David Heron.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a bit more of a playmaking style loose forward, wasn't he? A bit more handling.
Yeah.
As another halfback, really.
Yeah. Trying to think of someone. Phil Clark. Phil Clark took over from Ellery Hanley at Wigan, but I'd say was more of a running footballer and mobile. But then Andy Farrell took over from him, and he could do everything.
Andy Farrell, he could play football. Andy Farrell,
yeah.
He could do everything.
Sorry, Lee. I'll tell you another one that I rated, the player that I rated, who also played standoff, Paul Cook, who played for Hull FC and Hull KR.
But I would have put him more of a 5'8" than 5'8".
Yeah. But I think he had the spell. Yeah.
For large stretches of time, the 5'8" and lock roll almost interchangeable, if not only by size. I mean, the fact that Sean Timmins was your lock of the year, but also played 5'8" State of Origin, it goes to show there was that period where, that could have happened. Trent Barrett was a very big 5'8" and very much could have filled in the lock role.
I think he did play some lock. So I guess
Braithen Astor, another lock that played a lot of 5'8" and half.
I guess if I was trying to define the positions, well, really, your half had pass the ball 80% of the time and run it 20%. Your 5'8" would run it 50, pass it 50. Your lock would probably run it 80 and pass it 20. Something like that, roughly. We've not done that scientifically.
That's the teacher in you. Come bringing percentages out into the field.
Yeah.
So, Lee, when you're formulating a side, you said some coaches have tendencies to pick, they like an extra big man in the middle, or they like this, they like that. Are you one of those coaches that, if you look back on, obviously you've had a year off, if you look back on some of the sides you've coached, are you someone that had a tendency to pick a certain archetype of lock, or were you just someone that sort of, I know you've mentioned it before, saw what you had and just went off the back of that?
Always went off what I had. So I've had locks who've then filled in at hooker. So a bit like Alan Tong, like played at lock and then
Corey White.
Correct. I've had locks that have been like extra props. I've had a lock that has been the hooker and the front row has been props, basically. I've also done Second rower on the left side has been dummy half on the left side.
Ah, yeah.
And second rower on the right side hung on the edge. And on the right side, the right-sided fella went in at dummy half, and the left one hung on the edge, and then played 3 front rowers and a lock.
Right.
I've sometimes literally played 4 props in that kind of system too. I've sometimes used a number 6 as a prop and just played with one half.
Yeah.
So it all depends on what the format of it is. The best I have ever put in the lock position. In the best ever team I named from who I'd coached, it was Joe Stimpson, Jake Chaboyevich at lock, and Adam Elliott in the second row. So Joe Stimpson, Adam Elliott, and then Jake lock in the scrum. But I am telling you now, the biggest freak was a fella that nobody will know, a fella called Austin Bernard, who was signed to Melbourne as a kid. And what I used to do is kept him away at the start of the game. So I let the forwards bash each other for the first 10, 15 minutes. And I brought him on the field, and his instructions were to pop up wherever he felt like it. And he's a midget, he's like a jockey.
Yeah.
And he just caused absolute havoc. I'm talking like he scored 2 tries against the team that went on to be national champions, and just literally carved them up. They couldn't lay a hand on him. And he played at lock for me when he came on. He was number 14, and just allowed him to do whatever he wanted. And if the hooker was tied up in a tackle, he'd get to dummy half. If the half was tied up in a tackle and we needed 2 pivots, he'd get in a pivot, but ultimately he just popped up wherever he wanted. And that allowed me to put a prop on at the start in the lock position to get the ascendancy in the middle. And then once we had the ascendancy, bring Austin on. And it worked a treat. It was really good. So yeah, I've done all sorts with the lock position, to be honest.
Yeah.
In my early days as a coach, I like to have 4 pivots quite a lot. And I've done that since too.
4 pivots. So you get
4 pivots.
Yeah, right. So you just have an extra in the middle of the park.
So basically, there was your 6 and your 7,
and
then the third. Traditionally, now your third is the fullback, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So I've had my fullback on the lock being the extra one on each side, so that the fullback doesn't have to worry about getting around the field all the time.
Yeah, right.
And they just pick a side when we're shifting the ball. You remember me old good ball sets?
Yeah, of course.
And one would pop up on the left and one would pop up on the right.
Yeah, right. Okay.
You think about the amount of energy a fullback can waste running from side to side.
Well, it's not only that. A lot of sides pick their defensive marks off where the fullback's going to go. They'll push an extra to the long if there's a fullback there. Now, if you have that extra pivot, so you're literally marking up, 2 pivots aside from the 50%, instead of, sending an extra man one way, you're defending both sides. You're in a bit of bony rubble there.
I've always thought of the game fluidly like that. I've never thought, right, I've got to have a second row and I've got to do that. I've got to have this and I've got to do that. I've always thought to myself, well, if the ball is in a certain position, what different things can we throw there? It's just that the game has its own ecosystem as well. So you get players that have been through a system, so they fit a certain mold. But ultimately, I've always wanted to play around with whatever I've had to. I mean, you remember when you were at Greg's, I picked Luffy to give Teddy the ball.
Yes.
Effectively ruling out the role of the 7.
Yeah.
To give it. But what that did in turn is all the focus went on Teddy.
Yes.
So when James worked out that if he stepped off his right foot, sometimes it'd go straight through, and he scored a try in the grand final for us that broke the back of Blacktown. And I've always seen it in a fluid way like that, never been locked into a format. There's nothing to say you can't have 13 locks on the field who all interchange being a pivot, and you can do what you want. You really can.
You sound like I've just walked into Willy Wonka's factory.
That's right.
And the snailsberries taste like snailsberries.
Yeah. And there's stuff you can do with your numbers too. I mean, you can't because the jerseys don't always fit, but you can put your prop in number 1 and they go, geez, that fullback's big. Oh, jeez. Or 7, put him in number 7, or
put him in number 7. I'd love to play. I'd love to have played in the 7.
But the jerseys tend not to fit.
Yeah, these days. Yeah, that is the problem. All right. Well, Varley, I've already picked my Cameron Murray. I picked Cameron Murray as the lock for my team that we've been going week for week and discussing. So I let my cat out of the bag fairly early in the podcast today. Do you want to tell me who you would pick at lock forward for your best lock forward ever?
It's got to be Ellery Hanley Taylor. For reasons Lee said. Just watch him, like Lee said, you just watch him. Absolute legend of British Rugby League from the 80s and the 90s. I mean, there's been some good ones. There's been some good names. I mean, Paul Sculthorpe is another good name we haven't mentioned.
Yes.
What a great player he was. He could play second row, lock forward, stand off. But yeah, it's got to be Ellery for his support play and just his. He's got to be in that team. He's got to be in that team. Can't leave him out.
Looking back now, almost actually, I think I can every single week we've discussed, the best players in each position. There's been a very good quality POM every single week that we've discussed. That's taken the cake or gone very close.
There's a bit of a theory you should get your football managers from Scotland and your goalkeepers from Holland or something. I reckon you should honestly get your props and your middlemen from England. That doesn't mean... I know Samoa and Tonga is an emerging nation for creating that kind of player too, but there is a correlation between the Brits that come over, the ones that are successful are the big men in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think it comes from our evolution of a sport from being working men and women. Working men, sorry, because women didn't play for a long time. And a lot of it was down the pit. Down pit, lad. And that clubs like Castleford and Featherstone and others, probably Wakefield too, James.
Is in that area,
yeah. Big links with the mining industry. So, if there was a big job on in the mines, and the coach would have to be aware because he'd have to do just training on or whatever. There's a club called Lee Miners.
There is. Well, I think the mining was at the mines in Lee. I was thinking Lee that did it as well. I mean, when I was talking about the props, Kevin Ward, he'll have been a coal miner from Castleford.
Probably. So
I've got a mate that plays for Whitehaven right now, and he said there's something big there that most of the people in the town work for.
Yeah. So there's a big link with that. I mean, and you can probably trace a lot of the history of rugby league in England. You could probably do a book on the link with mining and rugby league.
Yes,
you could probably come up with a minus 13. It's a real strong. But did Mel Riley go down the mines?
Mel Riley did. Well, yeah, I'm guessing so. He's from Castleford. I'm guessing. Yeah, I'm guessing so because legendary figure from the 70s. Well, I never saw play, but
it's massive in bush footy in Australia. A lot of the mining industry supports a lot of the local rugby league out west, especially in Queensland. I know certainly in New South Wales as well. A lot of it is propped up by the mining sector.
Some historical ones, Vince Corellius. Rocky Turner.
Doug Lawton was a loose forward.
Frank Burge. Ron Coote. Taylor?
Yes.
Ronnie Coote.
Johnny Whiteley.
Yeah. Wasn't Terry
Johnny
Flanagan
Raper?
Yeah.
John Raper.
These are all loose forwards, mate.
Wasn't Terry Flanagan a loose forward as well?
Can't remember. Dave Valentine's another name.
Terry Lamb played a little bit of loose forward, didn't he?
He did. What a player he was. But Bob Lindner from the 80s. Australian.
Yes. Yeah. Bob Lindner, very good. He was a second rower too, weren't he?
He was.
We should have maybe mentioned him last year. Do you remember Gavin Miller?
I do, yeah. He's one of from the mid-80s with Paul KR. I just don't quite remember him playing, but I do remember his name. Yeah, I do. I mean, another one I quite like, British player, Gary Devorty. Was a bad loose forward. Hull FC and Leeds and Halifax.
Did John Cartwright ever play loose forward?
Possibly. Because that's the name I didn't mention last week. When we said about Salford, I knew he had a bit of a spell at Salford when we were talking about rowers.
Who did?
John Cartwright.
Yeah, he did. Here's another name for you. I'm surprised you didn't mention him, Taylor. Greg Bird.
Yeah, Greg Bird. Great player too.
Tony Carroll.
Yeah. Tony Carroll, yeah. Well, he's on my...
I'll tell you a funny story about Tony Carroll. In late 2018, I got married, and I got married on an island, and on the island at the venue, it was BYO alcohol. So I brought all the alcohol for the wedding. Anyway, I've gone down to the liquor store and I was discussing with the manager for ages, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up ordering some like 40 cartons of beer and however many, cartons of wine and just a ridiculous amount of alcohol. Anyway, we get down to the till and we're standing there and they're ringing it up line by line. And it was midday on a Wednesday. There was only one till open at this bottle-o. And I realized there was someone behind me with just a bottle of something. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I feel terrible. I turned around and say, oh, you go through. Here's Tony Carroll behind me with this big smile on his face. and I literally went, I turned around and went, oh, mate, if you want to go first, you're more than welcome to go through. He said, no, you're right. You do what you got to do. I turned around and I was with my brother-in-law at the time and he was literally next to me. I went, that's fucking Tony Carroll right there.
I've got a funny Tony Carroll story.
Sorry, I just realised we're live. You bit that out. But I just went, that's Tony Carroll. I was so shocked that he's right there. And he's like, yeah, I am Tony Carroll. I was like, nice to meet you. It was just the most random thing ever.
And I got this from the coach, Frank Endicott. Tony Carroll didn't take his New Zealand kit off after the 2000 World Cup final for 2 days.
2 days?
And just went out drinking. Luke Ricketson.
Yes.
Oh, yes, Luke, the sexiest man in rugby league.
Josh Maguire, not the sexiest man in rugby league.
No, not close.
Dale Finucane.
Dale Finucane, another great player. Josh Jackson as well.
Yes, Simon Mannering.
Yeah.
Simon Mannering was one of the most underrated players of that 2000 period.
Ashley Harrison.
Yeah. Going back, Lee, a very good playmaking forward over here. Shane Cooper at St Helens. Great box of tricks here.
Yeah. Trent Waterhouse.
Yeah.
Trent Waterhouse, what a
Dean
player.
Hallertau.
Dean Hallertau could play football. Tigers and the Dogs.
Sean Fensom.
Oh, yeah, Sean Fensom played some great footy for the Raiders. Microphone.
Glenn Morrison.
Yeah, Glenn Morrison, yeah.
Letty Mateo, Rennie Matua. Thanks to this article that I'm reading this. Thanks, Rob.
Rennie Matua.
Yeah.
Another clever one from over here, Lee, at ball play one, Les Holiday.
Geez, you have been.
I've got a bit of a list. John Pendlebury. Pendlebury.
Yeah. Mate, what are your thoughts on Pat Carrigan, Taylor?
What are my thoughts on Pat Carrigan? Look, I think Pat Carrigan's had a really outstanding year as a lock there for Brisbane. I think he's getting too big. I think he's more of a prop now. Just the way he plays football. I would like to see Brisbane use someone with a bit more hands. They just don't have anyone in that position at the moment. I think genuinely, maybe with another year or two of bulking up, I think someone like Tony Staggs would be a great lock forward for them, or even just push into the second row. I think he's got so much skill and he's got such a hard person to stop. I'd like to see him shift into the middle of the park.
I would love to see Ronaldo Mulatalo, based on what I saw from the kid.
Play lock.
Play lock.
Be interesting.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's not too far off at being solid enough to do it. He's a very solid winger. He's got wheels, but he's very solid through the base. But yeah, I just think Brisbane, they were on a good path with Kobe Hetherington. I like when he comes on, he causes some really good damage in the middle of the park with his leg speed and things like that. I just don't think. I think I'd like to see Pat Carrigan play front row with Payne Haas and have someone like Tom Flegler come off the bench.
Yeah, I'm a Flegler fan.
Flegler.
I'm a massive Flegler fan. I think if they can find that perfect lock that complements their halves pairings, and because I don't see they've got a really quality young side there, Brisbane. I just think they just need to play a little bit of Tetris, a little bit of mix and match with some of their positions and find a good rhythm for them. I'm concerned about Adam Reynolds pulling up injured this preseason, to be honest. He had bouts of that last year as well. Great signing for the club, all in all, absolutely. Can he steer them through the knocks week in, week out to a premiership? I'm unsure. Can they do it without him at this stage? No. So they've put all their eggs into a basket, and I don't think they know how strong that basket is.
You know what I love, Taylor? The symmetry of how we are now closing off for a couple of weeks, and we've just got the full forward pack there, and you've still not asked me who my lock is.
Well, you were never making a team from the start of this, but I do want to hear your lock, and if you're going to join in on this team-making business, I want to hear your props, I want to hear your hooker, I want to hear your back rowers. I want him to hit us all, Varley. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I want to hear it as well, confirmation league, please.
All right, so I will now name my best pack ever. Okay.
Right.
It's not a six pack. You haven't had one of them since you were 18, lad.
Mate, I never even had one then. Ellery at lock. Ellery Hanley.
Yeah, so we agree on that. Yeah.
Menzies left edge.
Definitely.
Yep.
Tallis right edge.
Yeah.
Hooker. Smith.
Yeah.
Webke.
Yeah.
Scott.
And who's your bench front rower?
Sorry, Lazarus. Lazarus instead of
who?
Scott.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bench, Scott.
Right. Okay.
And if I'm going for a bench spot here, I would probably want somebody like, I probably wouldn't go a second prop, Taylor, because I can push Ellery up into the front of the scrum.
Yep.
For small periods of the game. So I'd probably put somebody like Bradley Clyde on the bench there.
Yes. Okay.
It's not a bad old side.
It's not a bad side at all.
We've got 6 names the same there, Lee.
Okay.
You know what I'd like? We should post these to the Rugby League Coach Facebook page at the end of this period and see who thinks would win
Who's
the game.
got the best team? Yeah.
You know, let the public decide who's winning in a game of football.
No problem.
I think that'll be good. It'll be good to see the interaction there. I think that'll be great.
I agree.
It'll be great. Well, I feel like we've come to a bit of a natural end to the podcast, gentlemen.
How many times can you fit natural into a sentence?
Well, if you want, in order to keep it sounding natural, you know, you need to limit it.
Naturally, of course.
Mate, funny, that's been a theme of this podcast this year because you spent half of it trying to tell me to sleep naturally, didn't you?
You spent half of it putting me to sleep, lad. I'm here to liven the place up.
What's been your highlight of the year so far on the podcast, Taylor? All 29 weeks of it.
I think the madness of having Tim the Cheeseman and Ranil Kumar all in the same time with Varley. I think once we extended the invite, Lee, out to anyone out there who wanted to come, and then I think it would be the first episode where it was just all in. That was great for me.
I've enjoyed the ones with Kaplan, but I think my favourite podcast that we've done was actually in my at my lowest ebb when my luggage hadn't arrived in Melbourne. And that was the first 20 minutes. That was just funny.
The same undercrackers on, lad.
Yeah. 24 hours.
24
that
hours.
day, the club, Northwest Wolves, they lent me some clothes. Honestly, it's a good job there was no primary schools nearby. I'd have got arrested. What's Santa bringing you for Christmas, James?
I'm not sure yet, Lee, to be honest. I don't know.
Aye.
Right. Have you got a chimney for him to come down?
I haven't, so it'd be a start if I had, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah. What about you, Taylor? How's Santa going to get in your house? He tried the other week, didn't he?
Yeah, Santa tried to get in my house the other week in the form of 3 young lads that mistook my house for one they could just stream into.
Right.
Yeah, but I think Santa will come through the back door, I think.
Sure he will.
And he's he always does, Santa. And he'll get himself a milk, a cookies, and some beer. That's what we do in Australia. We leave a beer out for Santa. And then off we go.
So he gets sherry and a mince pie in England. He gets a beer and a cookie and all.
Beer and a cookie over here. He gets
right.
Santa.
So you can understand he wears like an hat like this and warm clothes in England and America and all that. What does he do when he's in Australia?
He sweats a lot. That's why he can drink beer at every house, because he sweats it out. He doesn't get pissed. He can't. He's too hot.
That's twice you've sworn on this pod today.
Pissed is not. Come on.
Try saying that to your nana in England.
All right.
How you go? If it's not swearing,
exactly. I don't have a nana in England anymore.
Try and say on the BBC before 9 o'clock.
The BBC before 9. The British Broadcasting Channel.
The
Corporation.
Corporation. 9 p.m.
What about you, Lee? Where does Santa come in your house?
I do have a phrase that Christmas is the most boring day of the year.
What?
Because I think that you should try and live your life like it's Christmas every day. So I'm a big believer that you should make every day as good as it can be anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But it's very rare that you get everyone in the one place on the same vibe that you have.
But I guess what I mean is at least have your weekend as Christmas where you just do what you want, enjoy yourself, live for the moment. I guess life sort of taught me that you've got to grab each day and not.
Very, very true.
And Christmas is always tricky for me as well because all my family are in England. So pre-COVID, I used to go home for Christmas, basically.
Yes.
Post-COVID, I've been going over there at different times running clinics. So, it's just different. Boxing Day is always a good day for me here. A few of us get together and
Boxing Day schooners.
Watch the cricket. And
yes, I'm going on holidays, and my only rule that my wife gets into me is I'm not allowed to start having a beer. I'm not allowed to have a drink till the cricket starts in the morning.
We'll just start putting the New Zealand test on. That starts at 7 a.m.
Yeah. Well, I push it forward because they talk about the cricket for an hour beforehand. I can't listen to that.
Just stick the New Zealand test on and say, it's because they all play in white anyway.
They all play in white anyway. No.
Essentially, my Christmas break as well has now morphed into the Gabba test. Right. But the only problem is it was only a 2-day break the other day because the game lasted 2 days.
Yes, that was ridiculous, wasn't it?
I know.
It was stupid, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
Liz Truss was Prime Minister for longer than that, so.
All right. Well, gentlemen, you all have a safe and happy holiday break.
Yeah. Tatty bye.
Christmas.
Are you driving any buses in the break, Varley? Do Pommies still need to get everywhere?
I'm working later today, Taylor, but I get the 4-day stretch. I work Christmas Eve, but I get Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and 27th, 28th off.
Are the bus drivers not going on strike like everyone else?
We're not. No, we're not. So should be busy. Well, the trains are going on strike a bit, aren't they? So we should be even busier still.
There'll be no industrial action on the Rugby League Coach podcast.
No, there won't.
if I wanted to strike, would you let me?
Mate, I'm all about the workers.
Oh, very good. All right, gentlemen.
Lad. See ya.
Let's wrap it up then. Have a good break, safe break, and we'll see everyone in 2023.
Toodaloo.